Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today, I'm talking about The Children of Red Peak by Craig DiLouie. Now, this is a book that I picked up sort of on a whim. I was in a Barnes & Noble looking through the horror section, as I am wont to do, because I love horror books, and I wanted something a little spooky. It's been a while since I've read any horror, really, and so I wanted to try something new. And so I just kind of looked through the section and browsed until I found something that sounded interesting and looked interesting to me. I liked the cover design. I liked the premise on the back. And so I just took a chance on it. I've never heard of Craig DiLouie before. I'd never heard of this book before, but thought I would just take a stab. Sometimes I like to do that, do blind buys and just see what comes up. The premise of the book is that there was this religious cult, so like about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was a suicide cult, like these things often are. And the book follows the survivors of this cult and what they are going through 15 years later on the 15th anniversary of the big event, as it is. So I thought that sounded interesting. Cults are fun. Religious cults are spooky and interesting. And I thought this would be a good, scary summer read. So let me just go through kind of the basic plot outline without giving any spoilers. And then I'll talk about what I thought of the book. The book basically follows this guy, David, who was a member of the cult in question, and he is now grown up, and he has, as a child, he is now grown up, and he has a job as an exit counselor helping other people escape cults. And one of his friends, who was also in the cult with him, named Emily, has committed suicide, and so him and a bunch of his other acquaintances and friends from that time period get back together at her funeral to reconnect and talk about what they had been through and where their lives are now. These other characters are Beth, who is a psychologist, Deacon, who is in sort of a punk goth band, and is sort of the most damaged of them, and he seems to kind of lash out and use his lyrics as a way of expressing his inner demons. And David's sister, Angela, who does not come to the funeral, but she's kind of been obsessed with the mountain Red Peak, where this big crazy event happened all those years ago, and she doesn't come to the funeral, but she's part of the whole thing. And the narrative kind of jumps back and forth between the modern day characters and what they're doing and what happened in the past of how they originally got involved with this religious cult and what happened, which is kind of cool. And eventually they all decide that they need to return to Red Peak to kind of confront their demons and see what really went on there. And that's sort of the big climax of the book, which I will not spoil. My big issue with this book, I mostly enjoyed this book. It was fine. It was fun. I thought the scares were good, and I thought the premise was good, and I thought the characters were mostly well drawn. My big issue with this book is one of pacing. The author spends a lot of time kind of setting up who all these people are and setting up the backstory of how they got to where they are today, and a couple hundred pages on all that. And then the big kind of, there's not a lot of like scares, there's not a lot of spookiness, there's not a lot of horror. It's mostly just like damaged adults talking about how their past messed them up. And then like the big climax of the book happens in like the last 50 pages. And it felt kind of rushed, and the ending felt kind of abrupt. So I felt like you had a lot of very slow character building and world building and history, and then a big rush to the finale, which is over before it even begins, pretty much. So I thought the pacing was a little bit off for my tastes. I also had an issue with some of the dialogue. I think it seems to be really hard for people to write convincing dialogue. Some of it's okay, but particularly when Deacon is talking with his bandmates about wanting to do a concept album about the events they went through, he's trying to write kind of like cool musician punk slang, and some of that didn't really work for me. There's one thing that I've started noticing, and authors do this a lot, and I probably do this a lot too in my own writing, and I'm trying not to, but it really drives me crazy. It's like a new pet peeve I have in stories, which is where the author gives you more information than you need about something to show off that they know about it. It really doesn't serve the story. It's about, proving to the audience that they've done their research. That always drives me nuts. So the example in this book, there's a couple of examples, but the one I'll give from this book is when Deacon is going on stage to perform. It says something like, he stepped up to the Shure SM57 microphone. Okay, like I record music myself, and I know what a Shure SM57 microphone is. It's a pretty standard, good mic, but like the audience doesn't need to know that. There's nothing important to saying that the mic was a Shure SM57 for the story. You could have just easily written it as he stepped up to the microphone, and you don't lose anything. The only reason that's there is to for the audience to know, oh, look, this guy knows about musical equipment. And it's kind of a showing off thing, and it just breaks my immersion from the story instantly because it feels so unnecessary. And I hate when people do that. And so it's like, I don't know if it's something I haven't noticed in the past, but now I'm noticing it constantly, and it drives me crazy. So, that kind of bothered me. But overall, I had fun with the book. I enjoyed the spooky religious aspect of it. The other thing that I was going to say is, in the flashbacks to the actual practices of the cult, I wish there had been more of that, because it kind of sets up how everyone arrived and, what the kind of original mission of this group of religious fundamentalists was before they kind of went crazy and became a suicide cult. And then there's kind of allusions to they spent weeks kind of purifying themselves and torturing themselves with asceticism and beatings and stuff like that before the big climax. But you don't really see much of that. Like the actual kind of horrific part, the reason I'm in the horror section of the bookstore is we don't really get much of that. It's sort of all implied and left to your imagination. And I wish there had been more exploration of what those final weeks or final days of the cult had looked like, because I think that would have been interesting. But instead, it's kind of left, vague. And you get a lot of, instead, adults talking about their problems, which is less interesting to me than children having to go through that kind of ordeal, which would have been, fun. That's a weird word to use in that sense, but in the case of a horror novel where you're reading it for entertainment, that kind of thing could be fun. So I was a little disappointed in that. So overall, it's a so-so book. It's a 3-star out of 5 for me. I enjoyed reading it, but it's not something I would seek out more work by the author. I have this perpetual problem with modern literature where I just feel like it's not really connecting with me on a deeper level. I like to read classics and older things because I find that it speaks more about the human condition, and it leaves me with something more. And these feel just a little bit shallow and a little superficial. But if you're into cult fiction and you like this type of premise, you might get a good enjoyment and a little bit of a scare out of I was going to say Crimson Peak, which is an excellent and underrated horror movie by Guillermo del Toro. I really like that movie, very gothic. But anyway, Children of Red Peak, if you're into that sort of thing, you might enjoy it. And that's all I have to say about that book for today. If you enjoyed this review, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Check back next Wednesday for another book review. I try to upload every single Wednesday. I might upload a few other bonus videos throughout the week on other topics like music and videos, things like that. But in the meantime, leave me your comments down below. If you've read anything by this author, I'd be interested to know what his other books are like. And until next time, I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you later.